Hi, I'm Paula Gilhooly, the Education Advisor for Adoption UK in Scotland. Today we are going to be talking about working smarter with your child's school. Top tips to working smarter with schools. This is what I am hoping to cover in the next half an hour. A few quick points to remember before looking at some maybe more revolutionary concepts using the recommendations on framing from each and every child. Each corner of this triangle shows a perspective with a stake in the school experience. If you like, our children and possible influences from the birth family in one corner, adoptive parents, and then the teacher, school establishment in the other. If we slide too far towards any of the corners, then we don't get the full picture, and our children and their education will be disadvantaged in the long run. Working together is the only way that our children can get the best out of education. This is the principle of GIRFEC, and that's what the presentation focuses on today. All partners need to work together to get the best outcome for the child. The child needs to see the adults working as a team, otherwise it's confusing. Parents need to get to know the class teacher, and they need to get to know and befriend the support workers so that they can share ideas and resources. And schools need to value the insight that parents can bring. Everybody needs to acknowledge the validity of how everybody else is affected by the loss of adoption. Teachers can acknowledge and begin to understand the impact of early life experiences and neurodivergent processing. Children are not at fault for having difficulties, and neither are their parents. Parents can acknowledge that children can be difficult to teach in a class of 30 odd children, and children need to be helped by the adults to understand their life experiences and the impact of how their brain and body functions. We need to be able to acknowledge that without cooperation, there is a danger of distorting issues and therefore not helping the child. So what is the professional's purpose in this triad? Is it to restore balance to the tension caused by the different perspectives? Is it to act as a mediator? The top tips in the rest of the presentation today come from my experiences as a teacher and a parent, and they also come from Haim Omer, who is a non-violent resistance proponent, and also they are utilising the framing recommendations from each and every child. So here are some basics that I think we need to look at before we go anywhere else. When we're talking about our children, when we see their needs up close and personal, we are really passionate. We want to get it right. We want to improve things for them. We know how much they've endured in their early life. If we are so passionate that we become emotional and dysregulated, then we might end up escalating matters. Something we all know is that we get much better results if we are calm and regulated when we are dealing with our children. And the same thing works when we're dealing with adults. We live in a world where time is in short supply. So I can't emphasize enough the competing demands on time. Pretty much 9 till 3:30, the teacher is with children teaching. Multiple lessons adapted in various ways for the children in their class. Outside of that time, teachers have to plan, prepare, and assess the work that they set. But remember, this is multiple lessons within lessons. They also take on development work and meetings. So teachers have a very limited time to meet with parents. We don't have capacity to meet a parent every week or have multiple hour-long meetings. Quite simply, we just don't have enough minutes. No matter how much we want to have those meetings, we have to be realistic about the time that is available. Think back to the triangle. The teacher will have a perspective, be open to listening. Is there anything valid in what they are saying? What is the common ground? The teacher's job is about facilitating learning. Is there something that you hadn't taken on board? And we also need to think about the fact that the teacher is only human. They are one person with that limited time. Are our expectations reasonable for one person with 30 kids? The teacher's also in a caring profession. Are we seeing signs of compassion fatigue in the teacher? These are things that maybe we need to be looking for and listening for. This is a tricky part. We are focused on one child. They have 30. If multiple children are overwhelmed or need adjustments at the same time, then that requires managing and prioritising. Even something as simple as moving seats might be more complicated than we realise. And if we don't understand the class dynamics or the room layout, then that's going to impact what's possible. And it's probably where we need to think about what's reasonable at this point in time, what's reasonable for the class and what's reasonable for the school context, as well as what's reasonable for your child. It's also good if we can go into school with some solutions to issues that are easy to implement and benefit the whole class or teacher. As we talk to the teacher, we might ask, is this workable? What things would get in the way of this? And obviously we keep in mind the context of the whole class and adjust solutions as we get new information from the teacher. And when we're looking at complex needs and thinking that those needs are not being met in class or school, then this is where we turn to the procedures and use these. We can work with teachers to build evidence, and that means that we remain on the same team throughout, and we'll get a lot further with that approach. All local authorities use the GIRFEC process in Scotland and a staged intervention approach to meeting needs. That means that we keep moving through the stages, which takes time to build evidence until we reach the level of support that is needed. Two more basic things to keep in mind. One, we've been learning and are still learning about our child. The chances are how we respond to our child now is very different to when they first arrived in our care. We've chucked out what doesn't work, we've deepened our knowledge, and we've learned new skills along the way. New teachers come on board every year, and it takes time to build a relationship, get to know the children that you support. Even when you're given a list of supports, you still need time to make that leap from theory to practice in real life. So remember that the teacher is joining the journey at a very different point to you. I know so much about additional needs now, and I look back on my mainstream teaching days and think, gosh, look at all those things that I didn't know. I'm learning more every day, and additional support for learning is what I do. Adoption is what I think about all the time. We don't know what we don't know. We don't get there any faster if somebody tells us off for not knowing. So I think it's really important for us to be patient and kind, because that's what we want for our kids too. So this section comes from Haim Omer, Courageous Parents Being a Good Anchor for Your Children. Haim Omer is a proponent of nonviolent resistance. In his book, Courageous Parents, he makes several suggestions about how to nurture relationships with schools, particularly when you've got an issue. And the first thing that he talks about is diplomacy in your attitude, and that this type of attitude is contagious. It avoids implied criticism and blame. So if we opt for expressions like we're in the same boat, and perhaps if the teacher is trying to focus on everything all at once, like the shouting out, the social disputes, being disorganized or not knowing where to start your work, then we can share the understanding that we've got and emphasize the common interest. If we act together, I know you're trying to help my child. That's not easy. Let's choose one thing to work on first. We might get further with that. Secondly, let's remember the whole class. This might come back to prioritizing again. What's the one thing that's going to make a difference in this class context? Is it got something to do with feeling safe? We know that's pretty high up the list. Is it supporting an executive function skill like planning? And again, if we go in with that attitude of all children need, I think we can find a way to support my child to function better, and therefore the whole class is going to benefit. So we're respecting the teacher's need to support the whole class. And again, back to prioritization and going back to non-violent resistance approaches, we're going to choose our battles. What are we going to work on first? Very repetitive, I know. Our child has got multiple additional support needs. We can't solve everything all at once, so let's focus on one or two main issues that will benefit both of us. Be honest. Being honest promotes constructive dialogue. Speak openly about the challenges that you've got. Let school know what you find difficult at home. The reality is that all children benefit from a community approach. We benefit from community approach as parents, and schools are in a brilliant place to be able to match us up to additional support services. And that's going to benefit us as parents as well as our children. So we can offer to help find a common solution too. We're going to work together and we're going to be a team. So we know what our child's difficulties are. I'm going to go out of my way to help. What can I do? It's not uncommon for us to come into conflict because our perspectives are going to be different, but we need to be mindful that that doesn't grow into a massive rift. We need to look for a way to repair any damage to a relationship when it happens. We might try a neutral point of view or a mediator. We might say things like, I can't see past this storm. We might benefit from another perspective, or we might just go in and acknowledge that something has happened, and we might use something like humour to dissolve any tension that has suddenly appeared, because we do need to get back on that same team. The next lot of tips are based on the framing recommendations of each and every child. Each and every child, if you have a look at the website, have open training that's open to the general public. I think for all of us who support and advocate for care experienced children, this training is essential. They've got 8 recommendations which are evidence-based. You can sign up to the training to find out much more about the recommendations and where they come from. You can explore the website and you can look at their toolkit. For my purposes today, what I've tried to do is take the recommendations and match them up to the school context specifically. So I might not be using them exactly as they intended. It's kind of how I've taken it on board and I'm beginning to apply it. I'm borrowing their recommendations, if you like, and applying them to the school context specifically. The recommendations are techniques that we can apply to help shift the public's opinion. So sometimes when we are talking about our children, it feels like the person that we're talking to doesn't quite get it. They might think that we're being over dramatic, or they might think perhaps if only we were more traditional in our approach. So how do we get the public to shift their perspective so that they see things more from our viewpoint? And the first suggestion is very similar to what I said a minute ago. We start with all children. It's inclusive language. Who can argue with that? Every child deserves to thrive. We are not talking about a group of other children who exist somewhere else. We're talking about all children, our children, your children. Later on in our conversation, we can move on to, would this be good enough for your children? So we're talking about all children need the same things to thrive: stability, robust support, and steady caring relationships. And by working together, we can do that. Secondly, we can talk about the good work that schools do. Your school does good work. We know how important each of these things are in schools. We want all children to thrive. We want them to do well. We want them to have good mental health. And a little while ago, I heard someone say, attainment is the passenger of well-being. And I think that is brilliant. So true. We want everybody to do well, and children are going to do well if we can get that context right for them. And we're going to help because we're going to work together. And in this quote here, we've mentioned the promise. We know that that's what everybody in Scotland should be working towards. So now we can move on to what each person around the table can bring to our planning meeting that we might be having. What can the parent do? The teacher, the management, the health services, the voluntary services. Is there something that the child maybe needs to take on board somewhere? And I know that the majority of the work will fall to the adults around the table, but there might be something and some responsibility that the child can take up too. It's all of us. And that keeps the focus on the group goal. We haven't splintered off into my child versus other children, or school responsibility versus parent responsibility. We are in this together. The third suggestion is to use the scaffolding metaphor when talking about your child's needs. We often talk in metaphors in our everyday language. They're shortcuts so that people can identify with what you're saying. We don't always need to get the detail to get it. In fact, sometimes the detail can muddy the waters a wee bit. But if we say things like, I'm drowning or I'm floundering, then people are going to get that sense of the overwhelm that you're under. The evidence-based metaphor used in the framing research is scaffolding. So scaffolding is what props a building up when it isn't strong enough to stand by itself. It's a good visual metaphor. People can see a child surrounded by scaffolding. In education, we talk about scaffolding, interventions, steps, supports all the time when we refer to the differentiated help that children might need. It's an easy way for a teacher to identify with your point. So for me, that move to high school, scaffolding is a really appropriate metaphor. Moving to high school pulled away the scaffolding that my child depended on to navigate school. But you would never pull scaffolding away if a building wasn't strong enough to stand on its own. So we need to look at what do we do to rebuild that scaffolding, particularly in S1. And part of that scaffolding might be having a trusted adult in school, which is going to give children the stability that they need to learn. That trusted adult will then go out to help the child build more scaffolding support that the other teachers and friends of the child can provide. So scaffolding is going to be a really useful metaphor for us. The fourth suggestion is to use the navigating waters metaphor. Again, it's another shortcut. In connective parenting and NVR, we are really familiar with the analogy of the safe harbour. And I've already mentioned drowning as something I might use a lot. The school environment has many external factors that contribute to the difficulties that our children face in school. Many of these are out with one person's control. So the threats posed by other children, and I don't mean they're necessarily doing anything threatening. I just mean that they're there, and that in itself can be a threat. The noises, the smells, the lights, the transitions, and the cognitive demands are all potential threats for our children. So using words connected with navigating waters gives a sense of the pressure that children feel in school, how there is an omnipresent threat of being overturned by forces outside of their immediate control. But it also helps to give a sense that if we had the right equipment or the right tools, such as helping hands, a lifeline, a boat, a harbour, an anchor, then we can ride those waves. So in the school context, the tools might be headphones, an exit pass, a trusted adult, a safe place. Then those things are going to be things that are going to help that child through that tricky patch. The very essence of school is community. So classroom charters, school assemblies, songs, fairs, trips, they're all about bringing people together. We're also transitioning from a time where we maybe had more traditional behaviour management, when children were maybe second to adults. And we've moved to a time where we're very much focused on children's rights as a kind of central pillar. And that transition between how we fit my right into our community is maybe a bit of a process of change. Community is something that schools value very highly, and the idea that a child is being excluded from community isn't going to sit right. But we know that that's what happens when exclusion occurs, and we know that the exclusion rates for children who are care experienced are much higher than the general when compared with peers. So if we revisit that all children deserve to thrive, all children benefit from community, that's the fundamental principle of inclusion. That's going to serve us well. We get to revisit the scaffolding metaphor and look at what more each of us can bring to the table. And if that exposes greater needs that are still not being met, then that's when we need to be able to go back to local authority procedures and the staged intervention process together. Nobody should feel isolated from our community. I think if we can avoid addressing stigma, then it's probably a good idea. It's quite difficult to bring this up without pointing the finger and saying, you're discriminating against my child, your behaviour comes from a place of stigma. That's really difficult, and it ties in with something that Chaim Omer says in his book as well. When this happens, the person that you're talking to might feel under threat. And under threat, people go into defensive mode. We stop listening openly, and we maybe think perhaps more about defending ourselves. And that's not going to serve us well if we want to promote an open dialogue, and we want to promote learning, and we want to promote change. If we need to bring up discrimination or stigma, then we need to be able to explain where it's coming from. So how our attitudes and views are consciously formed through what we see and hear on TV or in newspapers. And that's going to work much better from us, perhaps, if we can explain to people where attitudes come from. And that, I think, is probably going to be quite relevant to those of us whose children have been exposed to prenatal alcohol. I think a lot of understanding out there about FASD might be that it comes along with physical features, particularly facial features. And if we have that kind of if we have that in our mind, then that might stop us from actually seeing the behaviours that are in front of us and making connections. If we do need to challenge people's thinking, we need to make sure we do it in a way that doesn't stop people from engaging with us. The last thing to maybe think about is that we need to remain positive and affirm that change is possible. We want to avoid talking about the education system and talking about our child as if things are set, as if we talk about the education system as being broken, for example, then we've got that fatalistic view of, well, if we're saying it's broken, what's the point? Because there's always going to be something that's wrong with it. We don't want that attitude. We want people to be able to seize the opportunity and make change happen. We also have to be careful about using lifelong damage, for example, to talk about the impact of trauma, because again, there's a fatalistic aspect to that. What we want to be able to do is talk about the potential for change and the conditions that we want so that we are going to have the best environment for our child. We want to be specific about things. So we might focus on working together, we might focus on each having an action, and that is going to improve something. And again, we can be really specific about the solutions. We need a trusted adult. We need a safe place. Coming in 5 minutes early is going to make a really big difference. If my child has a scaffolded worksheet where they don't have to write the learning intention, for example, that's going to make a difference. Having headphones to minimize noise is going to take away one of the stresses for my child. So let's, again, think about the solutions and make sure that it's everybody around the table that's contributing something. Before we close, I'll just quickly highlight the 3 education supports that we offer for families and professionals. We have a range of help sheets on various themes on our website. We have education discussions which take place monthly on different themes. Presentations are often recorded, a bit like this one, and available on our YouTube channel. And for families and professionals who are looking for information and support ideas for their child, you can ask for a one-to-one education meeting where we'd look at the needs, the current supports, and we'd talk about what else might be on offer for your child. If you would like to contact us, you can contact us on the helpline, or you can ask for an education meeting by contacting education.scotland@adoptionuk.org.uk. And we do have a range of supports on our website in the form of fact sheets. For those of you who are members, we have additional fact sheets and webinars that you have access to in the members only section.